Hello, and thanks for joining us today for All Things DSO. I'm Beth Gaddis, the editor-in-chief at Planet DDS, and I'm joined by my friend, Brian Colao, the director of the Dykema DSO Industry Group. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I mean, it just seems like when the time just flies and we're all getting old or something, we're right back here again. It seems like we just did it, but no, it's been another month and here we are. Well, Beth, I'll say what I always do. Thank you for having me. I really enjoy doing this show with you.
Well, I enjoyed having you. And so we saw each other in Florida just a few weeks ago at the Dental Forum. And since then, we've had some things happen in the marketplace. We've had the Fed rate cut come in. Tell me a little bit about what's going on, what you're hearing about.
Yeah, it's gonna take a whole lot more than what just went on here. But yes, the market had pretty much priced it in, and we've been saying on this show actually for many months that the Fed got it wrong and they
Yep.
waited too long and they need to lower the rates. And I still feel like September it was like my reaction was, well, about damn time. I mean, we've been waiting for months, so it's good. I mean, certainly it's positive that they did lower the rates. But I was just talking to some, contacts and banking colleagues that I have, and they've said the rates didn't even go down. Some of the rates even went up, meaning the Fed did lower the rates in September, but some of the key lending rates for DSOs and others in healthcare, they either stood the same or even went up just a tiny bit. So it's going to take, and I asked the question directly of some folks I know in banking. I said, well, what do you think? They said, it's going to take 3 or 4 more cuts, maybe even 2%, 2 points down before we see some significant relief. I think that one was maybe a half point down. So, you got a point and a half to go. So, definitely positive. I'm not going to say it was bad, but it was too late. They needed to do it much earlier, and it's going to take a lot more than what they did right there to make a significant impact.
Well, that leads me to the next question that everyone's asking is, at what point then do we think that things will turn around and we might be able to see some mergers and acquisitions actually going through?
Again, this is not a political show. Don't shoot
Yes.
the messenger just for saying stuff. We know there's an election coming up. I feel like if the Republican gets elected, and this thing, we don't know what's going to happen. They keep changing candidates. But if a Republican gets elected, I feel like, first quarter of next year, we're probably going to see some relief. And the reason being is you'll probably have 2 interest cuts by then, maybe more. And at least from a business standpoint, the way the market perceives it, some momentum. They'll say, we have 2 cuts and now we have a Republican that's pro business. So we can go take a leap of faith and maybe start doing deals. If we get a Democrat in there, I mean, you'll probably have a couple interest cuts, but the confidence on the M&A side is simply not there for at least what the Democrats seem to be saying they're going to do or not do. One of them is raising capital gains taxes, which is horrible for the M&A market. So we may, I mean, depending on I guess the answer to your question is it depends, is the answer. And I suppose if a Republican gets elected, you might see something first quarter. The year might get off to a nice start and build on that. If it's a Democrat, it's anybody's guess. It's going to be a longer period of time. This sort of DSO transaction drought could go into second, third quarter of next year. I mean, it's possible.
So tell me a little bit more. I mean, if private equity does come in and they start making deals again, one of the things that I feel like I have noticed this year is that there's been a little bit of a culture clash between like private equity backed ownership or investors and, like kind of typical healthcare leadership, especially doctor owned. Have you seen that kind of a culture clash too? And do you have any words of advice on that?
Well, yes, but I mean, yes, and yes, and yes. Yes, I have seen it. Yes, I have some opinions. I don't know if it's words of advice, but I've got some opinions on it. But the first point, the first opinion or perspective on it is it really a culture clash because it was going on before, or is it a product of the market slowdown and the fact that there hasn't been a recapitalization? Because a lot of folks, okay, if we're talking about private equity versus DSO management versus affiliated dentists, a lot of the things that are going on today were going on the last 3 or 4 years, but nobody really objected to the management style or what was happening because they all felt like there'd be a recapitalization event by now or in the next 3 or 4 years. So they just kind of, if they were a little disappointed, they just kind of said, oh, let's turn the other cheek, whatever. We're going to get a nice, healthy recapitalization event. And I feel like had the markets not frozen up and had we seen those recapitalization events, a lot of the stuff that we're calling culture clashes now would never have bubbled to the surface. Like it wouldn't even, have happened. But I think as yet another bad, unfortunate byproduct of, the slowdown, the economic slowdown, the slowdown in transactions is there also have been culture clashes, a lot more than I've seen in probably the last 10, 12 years. It's cyclical. It depends on the conditions. There were a lot of culture clashes going on 10, 12 years ago. At the time, they were, figuring out what the regulations on DSOs were going to be. But last 5 years, I mean, up until say this year, last year and a half, it's been kind of clean. There really weren't, there'd be the odd issue here and there, but for the overwhelming majority of the time, there were not these type of culture clashes, and there were lots and lots of M&A deals and lots of recapitalizations, and everybody was happy. Now you've got, an extreme slowdown in M&A deals, an extreme slowdown in recapitalization issues, and a huge uptick in so-called culture clashes. What I really think it is frustrations from the lack of the recapitalization event bubbling up into things that were not a problem when everybody thought there was going to be an event, but now that they think they're going to be here for a much longer period of time, it's bubbling up.
How do you see that impacting doctors in particular?
Impacting doctors? Well, I mean, the doctors are the ones that are often causing, some of the problems. I think, they're now objecting to things that they weren't objecting to. But, I think cooler heads have to prevail here, okay? Because there's a lot of really unreasonable stuff I've seen out of doctors and dentists this year that I have to say, because on most of these shows, when they talk about it, they say, oh, private equity's coming in or management and they're doing bad things. I have to tell you, if I was to make a list of the issues I had this year, among, all of my DSO and private equity clients, it's probably 85% bad things out of dentists and only a tiny 10 or 15%, things out of my clients where I'm like, hey, maybe we should do that better. Maybe we didn't quite do that right. Very tiny percentage. And 8.5 out of 10 is the dentist, where the problems bubble up, just being, very unreasonable about things. And again, to me, it's a product of the recapitalization event not occurring and certain folks just getting very frustrated, and it's bubbling up and manifesting into all sorts of things, like culture clashes, as we're saying.
So we've talked before about, when you can't have M&A, then you have to go through same store growth. So the easiest way to do that is by, growing provider working days and then growing production per working day.
What you can't do, I guess I'm answering a question from about 10 minutes ago, but it's important and I want to answer it. You said, do you have any advice? And I made a joke and I said, I don't. I actually do have advice on this. And you prompted me when you just said that. Right. If you can't do M&A activity, there's two ways to grow EBITDA. One is M&A activity. Two is same store growth. If you can't do the M&A activity and you're a dentist and you're listening to this, you got to be open-minded to same store growth. The thing that bothers me a lot is when the dentists are unhappy, okay, and they want the revenue to go up, they want the value of the organization goes up, but then they're resistant to change. I'm talking about the affiliated dentists in the DSO context. I mean, if you want your revenue to go up and thereby the EBITDA to go up and the value of the organization to go up, by definition, you can't keep doing the same thing. Remember, insanity is doing the same thing and hoping for a different result. If whatever you're doing, and you might be doing okay, is yielding like okay results, but you want a different result, by definition, you got to change something. And I see it over and over again where an affiliated dentist or somebody might, say, hey, I want to maximize the value. I want revenue to go up. Okay, here's some suggestions for same store growth. Oh, no, we're not doing that. We're not adopting any of those. Well, then how are we going to see the same store growth? So to me, that's the advice that answering your question from 10 minutes ago. My advice is if you're trying to achieve same store growth, you got to be open to new things and open to changing the way historically you've done business. And this is led to a few of the culture clashes you're talking about, where the DSO has said, hey, we got to increase same store growth. So here's some things that I would suggest we should do right now to increase revenue. And it's like, no, we're not going to do it. No, I mean, you can't do that. You can't have both. You can't have things staying exactly the same and yet achieving, a lot of same store growth. I mean, maybe if you're running a good practice, it might like go up a little bit every year. But if you want to go like this, you got to change the way you're doing things. You can't say we're keeping everything the same and I want the revenue to go like this. I mean, no, like that won't happen.
I was just looking at group dentistry now, and one of the sections that they always have that I love is John Fiddler's, where he's talking about who's moving in and out. And it felt like in August, there were a number of moves for CEOs, COOs, and a lot more vice president of operations than I had seen previously. And
well, the VP of operations, yeah, I've seen a lot of VP of operations and operations positions. I've seen a few. I mean, me just personally, I've seen a couple CEOs, not that much. A couple CFOs I've seen, but what I've seen a ton is operations positions. And yeah, all of a sudden they're like, hey, there's a little different pressure on us. Before, the pressure was M&A, everything was M&A, and maybe you needed somebody with one type of skill set, but now the pressure is same store growth. You might need some folks with a little different skill set, and that's why you're seeing some personnel changes or some adding personnel. It's not just like you're getting rid of people. Some people are staying the same, but they're adding on some people that have unique skill sets.
So in this tough economic time, have you seen anything that has really worked well for motivating people to, one, stay with the company, believe in the mission, make the changes, but kind of all be part of everyone rowing the same direction in order to get out of these tough currents and into smoother water?
Yeah, culture is the biggest thing. If you've got culture and people like coming to work there, that's the best thing you can do to keep people. I mean, Fiddler was here because I've talked to John many, many times. I know you cited, some of his work a few minutes ago. He always says it. It's not money isn't the biggest thing. I mean, if people are happy where they're going, they'll often forego more compensation for the happiness or the empowerment. So, a positive culture is probably almost the number one thing I can think of. That something else would be certain employee incentives. I mean, you got to follow the regulations and do it in a regulatory compliant way, but regulatory compliant incentive programs also, where people have skin in the game. That's what Warren Buffett always said. If you want to get maximum production out of people, you got to give them skin in the game, and being able to do that in a compliant manner, is another way. So I would say culture and coming up with a way to give people sort of skin in the game are the two biggest things to, retain talent right now.
So this is a broad question. I'm just interested in your opinion. Would you say that DSOs that grew aggressively, especially 2020, 2021, beginning of 2022, are the ones that are having the most operational issues now? Or is it not that cut and dried?
I hate to be all cliche on you right now, Beth, but you know the saying, if you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. So what there are some, no question, that maybe grew a little too fast, and I say they got indigestion. Now they got to digest what they bought, and they are, some of them are struggling. There are some that bought a lot and they were able to do it correctly. They chose correctly. They picked the right, affiliated dentist partners, and they're doing just fine now. So, I can't make the cut and dry, distinction that you're drawing there, but certainly there are some that bought too much and now have indigestion, but there are others that did just fine. So, I can't say in every case it's that way, but there are some examples of that for sure.
And have you seen any, I'm thinking specifically of doctor founders of DSOs, doctor owners that have learned how to work really well with PE? And if so, what would you say, has been the key to their success?
I mean, a couple things, really. Yeah, the answer is yes. That it seems like sometimes it's like There's like, what was that? The vampire and werewolf movie. You're on team vampire or team werewolf or whatever. There's sometimes not in the middle. There's folks that get along really, really well. The characteristics of the folks that get along really, really well are like, business oriented entrepreneurs. They founded their own business. They really understand the economics of the business, and they're aligned with the values of the PE firm on, ethically and appropriately maximizing the economics of the business. And I think, there's probably three factors that go into the people that work the best with, private equity sponsors. One, they're entrepreneurs themselves. So they're maybe not exactly two peas in a pod, because the private equity is a little more sophisticated, but they understand where they're coming from and they're aligned. That would be one. Two, they got the right personality. They have an open-minded personality. They're willing to sort of try, sort of new things. I think that would also, be a characteristic of, somebody that gets along really, really well. And then, somebody that has run a pretty good operation. Because reason I say that is if you've run a really good operation, there are some operators that are successful despite themselves, meaning, they have achieved success, but they're not really running a tight operation. Their margins are so high on stuff they're doing that there's a lot of EBITDA, but they're not running a tight operation. Private equity tends to make recommendations. They tend to look at that and say, hey, we got to change a whole bunch of things now. Versus if you're already running a tight operation, probably you got this already, and private equity doesn't have to make a ton of suggestions, and they're going to let you operate, fairly close to the way you've operated before. So I think those three things, if you're already running a tight operation, that doesn't lend itself to a lot of critiques. If you've got an entrepreneurial sort of open-minded personality, and like I said, you're an entrepreneur yourself, those are the folks that tend to get along. I guess if your next question is who doesn't tend to get along, well, it will be people that are set in their ways, that are just not open to change. Dentists that are not good business folks that, historically, again, they succeeded in spite of themselves, but they really weren't running a tight ship. And because they weren't running a tight ship, it lends itself to a lot of suggestions and a lot of recommendations as to how to change it around. Some people in that situation do well, though. They say, that's why I did a deal with you, private equity group. You're right. I'm not a terrific business person, and I didn't know how to run this before, and I want your advice. And there are some people that react to it that way. And that's perfect. In fact, that is the how should I say it? That is the essence of all of the value add of the DSO model. You've got business folks focused on business and clinicians focused on the clinical aspect of it. But then sometimes you'll get in a situation with someone that they're like, I'm not a good business person, but I refuse to admit it. I don't want to change anything in my office, and I'm not open to new ideas. What I say is you probably got to screen that person out and not do the deal. That's not a good partner. But some people, when the big boom happened in 2021, 22, unwittingly did transactions with folks like that. And, that often has led to the culture clashes you're talking about.
So how do you screen for that? We're now looking at lessons that have been learned, right? Between how things were done 3 to 4 years ago when money was cheap to what we've learned during the last 18 months to 2 years. What are some of the lessons that people
you treat it like, I would say a romantic relationship.
I was going to say a marriage.
Like, what do you think? Like, this is a thing, like, Beth, if I told you, somebody dated somebody for 3 days and got married, or somebody dated somebody for 6 months or a year and got married. All things equal, I don't have all the statistics. I would like to say, based on these reality shows where they get married like that day and it always ends up in divorce later. I would say, those that took time to get to know their partner and really spent the time getting to know them when they got married, while not perfect, they have a much higher likelihood of lasting and having a lasting relationship. And those that, you see it all the time, you went to Vegas, oh, I met her like yesterday and we got married, in a day or two, those relationships tend to be fraught with peril a lot more likely. I'm not saying you can't get lucky. This isn't a romantic show, but maybe you can meet your soulmate and it's love at first sight, and that's great. But that is really gambling. That is not a recipe generally for success. If you do that 100 times, there'll be a couple lucky people that tell you how great it went, but the majority of folks are going to find out things about somebody that they married in one day or a week that they didn't know because they didn't take the time to get to know them. And they might tell you, I don't like this. I found out this about this partner and I don't like what they're doing. And I had no idea it was going to be this way. Well, the way you eliminate that on both ends, on the buyers and the sellers, is you got to spend the time to get to know the partner, and you got to pick the right partner. And the other thing, though, is you can't just be fumbling around saying, I hung out with Beth and she likes the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and she likes baseball and she doesn't like roses. She likes carnations. I mean, that's good. That's good. But you have to know what you like. And you really have to sometimes think about, well, what do I like? I mean, do I love roses, but she doesn't? Ooh, that could be a problem, or I don't care. That doesn't bother me that she likes carnations and not roses. That doesn't bother me. So you really have to do a self-evaluation as a buyer and a self-evaluation as a seller first to say, what do we want? Like if you're the buyer, what are our objectives as an organization? Who's our ideal seller? Which direction are we going? Who are we as an organization? And if you're the seller, you're an individual, you got to say, my organization that's now going to sell into this, my practice, or my practice is, what is my culture? What are the things that are priorities for me in a partner? What is like a non-negotiable thing? And what is something that's, less concerning to me? And you almost got to be to the point of writing them out in a list. And then you got to sit there and during the diligence period, it's, in romantic things, it's courtship. In this, it's diligence. We call it diligence in these transactions. But during the diligence period, you got to ask these questions. And if you've got your list, and sometimes it's really handy to come up with like a diligence list, and you have like 5 non-negotiable things, and the buyer, has in a negative way responded to 3 of them, so 3 of your 5 non-negotiable things are not going to work out. You should not do the deal. Now, the problem is an LOI shows up with a whole bunch of money in it usually, and that sometimes clouds people's judgments. They, when I'm doing my presentation of best overall value, price is on the second page. I run through a whole bunch of factors. Price is on the second page, but a lot of folks put price on the first page, number 1 position, and you can find yourself very easily in situations where it's not a good fit and you're miserable. And I look at it sometimes because I'll get consulted with and it'll be like, oh, this person's evil or that person's evil. And I would say, 5% of the time, maybe somebody is behaving, in a bad manner. 95% of the time, nobody's evil. It just wasn't a good match. Like there's not, you're looking at the buyer and you're like, no, I understand what the buyer's doing. I can't say that's wrong. That's who their identity is. And then the seller says, I can't believe they're doing that because these are my core values. This is what I'm doing. And I'm like, well, I understand that too, but y'all should have figured this out before you got married with each other in this transaction. So the best thing you can do to avoid it now, given that, we had a record number of transactions in the last quarter in 19, the last quarter of 20 and all of 21 and part of 22, it's too late. If the deal's done, now we just got to deal with it. But as the deals start to fire up, and there still are a lot of single office transactions being done now and smaller deals being done, you really got to do your diligence and make sure the buyer fits with your identity and your culture so you don't find yourself, post-closing just being in an unhappy situation where it's not necessarily their fault. They're not doing anything that I would say is really wrong. They're just being themselves. It would be like if you said, I don't want to be with my partner anymore because they don't put the toilet seat down. Okay, I can't say it's a federal crime, but if that really bothers you, that might have been something you needed to figure out before you went and got married.
So, Brian, do you recommend secret shopping? I mean, do you recommend that a buyer maybe go and visit at least a couple of offices on site? And the reason why I ask that is I've talked to a lot of people over the past year where, they kind of blame this idea that maybe there were huge acquisitions made where nobody was going in because it was COVID time. They weren't traveling so much. They weren't going in to really feel what the environment feels like and some of the practices that they were acquiring.
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways people conduct diligence both ways. As long as you're not blatantly dishonest about it. I mean, if you're a buyer, there's nothing wrong with entering the practices and just checking them out yourself. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're a seller and you're wondering, you're going to affiliate with DSO ABC and a couple of their offices, there's nothing wrong with visiting, announced or unannounced, to go look at it. I mean, don't steal anything or look at anything you're not supposed to. But if you're talking about go in the front door and take a look at it and you just look at the look and feel of the practice, yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And you also need to get, references. And something else is, sometimes, they'll say that, you'll ask the buyer and the buyer will give references. And sometimes people will say, the best buyers are the ones that say, you can call anybody in our system, call anybody and ask them about us. I mean, those are the best ones, for the sellers. Other give a select list, but there's nothing wrong with doing some research and figuring out who has affiliated with this DSO that maybe they're not on the reference list, but they're nevertheless part of the system, and call them up and ask them what they think. I think that's healthy, and I think you should do that. And I think some of this, yeah, I mean, Beth, we had a once in a generation. I don't want to waste any time on the show talking about COVID. It was such a rotten period of time for everybody locking it down. But a lot of people had to do a lot of things with insufficient information during COVID, and, lack of in-person visits, lack of things. So if, it ended up not being a match because of COVID, then, you can't beat yourself up about it. You just got to navigate it as best you can. But certainly on new transactions that occur right now, the world is open back up again, and there are plenty of opportunities to conduct diligence that right at your fingertips without a lot of time or resources that will yield very valuable information as you do your decision-making process.
Well, we are out of time. Any last thoughts?
Again, I mean, every time I have fun on this show, you tell me we're out of time. I don't know if I'm doing good or bad. You pull the clock on it. I don't know.
That is the best kind of conversation, when it flies by like this.
Well, final word is, look, I guess what this is going to air probably in October. I don't know if we'll have another one of these before the presidential election. I mean, just if we have another 30 seconds before we go here, we may not have one. The next time we get together may actually be after the election. And yes, we will have a lot to report on the show that we do after the election. I was just looking at the calendar now, and if this airs in October, the next one will air after the election. So I hope we're all still here. There's not litigation and recounting and all kinds of crazy things going on. Hopefully we'll be able to see much better where we are by the next show after this one.
Well, I covered the 2020 election. I'm sorry, the 2000 election. And so I remember the first recount and the first time we had it all go to the Supreme Court. So we will hope that this will be much faster, more definitive. And I think we should absolutely be scheduling this to tape for November after the election. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great day and really appreciate you spending the time with me.
Thanks, Beth.